Chapter 5. The Approach of the Upanishads. It was the coldest of the winters in the past 3 decades in Kashmir. The Dal Lake had been frozen for nearly 3 months. It appeared that the sun had gone on a real long vacation. The sub-zero temperatures that persisted had become quite painful, especially for the old. Many of the senior citizens had succumbed to the cold and given up the effort of survival and passed on to the much deserved rest. Only for the last few days could the people behold the golden orb shining rather reluctantly. The earth had started warming and the yellow crocus had started appearing on the ground, intimating the arrival of the spring. The slow and the steady change of weather was bringing about a distinct change in the mood of the people, whose faces wore bright smiles. As if to give a violent jolt to the exuberance of the people, one night the skies turned orange due to the blaze produced by the burning temples and shops in nearly 40 villages. There was shock, suspicion and fear in the hearts of the people. Even friends from childhood became wary of the other just because he or she belonged to a different community. All the expectations of a pleasant spring vanished just like the snow on the ground. For Omkar Nath Raina, who was one of the victims, the loss appeared irreparable. His whole shop was gutted and goods worth lakhs of rupees was destroyed. The district collector, the superintendent of police, and other officials had called on him to offer their lip sympathies. The insurance agency had sent a person for assessing the loss. The opportunistic assessor was creating non-existing problems for extracting whatever money he could lay his hands on from the victim. To turn his attention from the shock and other problems, Omkar Nath started doing something strange. Soon as the shop was cleaned of the gutted goods, he started sitting on the same spot with his empty cash box and a few empty tins in front. There was nothing to sell, but he left his home as usual in the early hours of the morning. When a friend asked as to what he did with the empty tins in front, he answered that the only activity he had engaged since his childhood was selling, and to avoid the problems and depression, he could think of no other way of occupying his mind. In the months that followed, he recovered as he arranged for the running money and the goods to really sell instead of pretending to sell. The case of Omkar Nath is neither typical nor singular. All of us engage ourselves in multifarious activities to avoid certain feelings like fear, anxiety, worry, depression, irritation and anger, which apparently accompany all the problems linked with life. The activity is not necessarily on the physical level. We tend to withdraw into our imagination like the ostrich hiding its head in the ground. Most of our time is spent in rehearsing the dialogue or argument or fights with imaginary friends or enemies. The involvement is so much that we are incessantly replaying these mental rehearsals in real life. Because of our narrow vision and perhaps selfish reasons, we imagine someone to be a friend and some other to be a foe. The effect of our involvement is that we superimpose our mental image on the person we meet and interact with that image instead of the real person. In real life, however, the situation is invariably different from the one imagined. Consequently, we transact with only the phantoms instead of the real persons. Thus, our life becomes a continuous avoidance of situations, problems, and persons. Not only do we try to avoid the external, but even ourselves. This is obvious from the fact that most of us are unable to be alone. All the time we want the company of friends and activity. Some of us may be able to be alone a little longer than the others and may not seek the company of friends. Instead, we occupy ourselves through creativity or reading or music or anything that helps us eliminate the feeling of loneliness. It is indeed very difficult to be alone, devoid of props or occupations of the body and mind. One of the most rigorous punishments given to prisoners is the solitary confinement, wherein they cannot see even the face of the guards. To preserve their sanity, they resort to fantasy or try to be content with the sounds of the feet. Thus, the habit of occupying ourselves has become very stubborn and instinctive. The rishis of the Upanishads not only understood the cause of this habit, but also our affinity for the compulsive activity. A verse from Kathopanishad does more than analyze this problem. Paranchi khani vyatranat swayambhuhu tasmat parang pashyati nantaratman kaschid dhiraha pratyagatmanamaikshit avritta chakshur amritatvamichan. The self-evident reality made the sense organs, including the mind, with an outgoing disposition. Therefore, man perceives only the outward things, but not the inner self. A certain wise man, aspiring immortality, turned his senses inward and realized the inner self. The Upanishad calls the senses as khani, which means the openings or windows. They have the capacity to open only outside, as the senses are occupied in interacting with the sense objects outside. Whenever the senses are effective in gathering the information of the outside world, the mind is necessarily behind the senses. When the mind is married to the outgoing senses, it resorts towards extroversion. The verse above observes that due to the extroversion of the mind and senses, most of us are unable to experience the inner self. Millions of years of evolution is involved in fashioning the properties and functions of the senses as well as the mind associated with them. The sense organs have evolved from unicellular organism to the complex multicellular human body with the gradual increase of awareness. This awareness, however, is only of the external environment. The progress in defining and coordinating this awareness has been called as the advance in knowledge. The knowledge at the level of sense organs is always the knowledge of the external world, which is in the clutches of time and is subject to constant change. With the advent of the higher brain, however, the evolution registers a gradual advancement. This advance is through an increase in knowledge of the external environment, followed by the control over it. The organisms gifted with this new device of the cerebral system are endowed with the power not only to coordinate efficiently the activities of the different sense organs, but also to consciously direct them towards the deliberately chosen purposes and goals. The primary urge behind all these activities is sensate satisfaction and survival. Human beings have the capacity to nurture higher visions and pursue nobler goals, but they continue to function at the sensate level most of the time. The higher visions and nobler aims raise the man to the moral and spiritual level of existence as they proceed from deeper dimension of personality than the sense level. While the sense level relates him to the temporal world, the deeper dimension relates him to the eternal. progress at the human stage of evolution is measured partly in terms of the growth and development of the sensate individual through control and manipulation of the external environment, and largely in terms of the emergence of the spiritual man through inner discipline. The progress characterized by the control over the external without the inner discipline, and spirituality has brought about a disastrous effect on the world. The increasing gap between the haves and the have-nots, the suspicion among nations, the struggle among the developed and the developing countries, the war among the religions and races is known to every one of us. This suspicion has forced humanity into a vicious circle of intolerance, violence, and more suspicion. There is helplessness in human behavior because being at the physical level and sensual level all the time has made us almost totally unaware of the inner dimension. And yet, we are unable to play deaf ears to this call of the inner dimension, and hence the anguish. The distinction between spirituality and religion, as it is commonly understood, is great. Normally, our so-called religious practices characterized by rituals and external observations like fasts, prayers and vigils are governed by symbols and books and are usually for achieving certain material gains or to overcome worldly problems. These practices, though can be utilized to internalize the consciousness, mostly aim at enhancing the acquisition of sense objects, which has been sophisticatedly termed as achievement or success. Such a religious person enters a place of worship either with a complaint about some problem or with an appeal to fulfill certain desire. It does not in any way mean that the religious practices are to be belittled, as they only indicate that most of us are not yet ready to turn our attention away from the external world of objects and events, with all its energies thus used only for gaining control over the external or in sensate satisfaction and survival. The humanity is totally stuck to the mire of external confusion and is paying a very heavy price of total lack of awareness. This obsessive attention to external things has been called as Bahirmukhata. Spirituality, on the other hand, which has been called as Adhyatma Vidya, the science of the higher self, aims at the experiential understanding of the workings of the body, senses, mind, intellect, and ego, and to gain a control over them. Upanishads, which are some of the greatest canons of spirituality, had taken up the study of human possibilities not just theoretically but experimentally. The fruits gained by this study were three: wisdom, that the mind or reason of man is independent of his sensory apparatus, was the first fruit, which was called as Shama. The control and manipulation of the psychophysical energies in man, resulting in an emotionally stable inner milieu within him amidst the external problems, was its second fruit, called as Dhamma. Human advance towards spiritual awareness, resulting in the realization of its true self, which is infinite and immortal Atman, and its manifestation in life and action that is in perfect harmony with its divine nature, was the third fruit, which was called as Jnanam. The word Antaratman, or the inner self, in the verse quoted above, is the awareness, the interpretation of which is according to one's level. For one, who is at the sensate level, it is the awareness of indulgence. At the mental level, it is the awareness of the involvement. At the intellectual level, the awareness of the process of analysis and integration. And at the level of the ego, the awareness of the process of contraction or limiting the consciousness. And at the highest level, it is pure awareness, which has been called as Pratyagatman, or the innermost self in the verse. The process of internalizing the awareness is the primary aim of spiritual practice. The technique of internalizing of consciousness is called as tapas, while the internalized consciousness as antarmukhata by the Vedanta. Bahirmukhata is natural to most of us, while antarmukhata requires an immense grit as it involves redirecting the consciousness in a diametrically opposite direction. Our common experience shows how difficult it is to control and manipulate our psychophysical energies. The mental and moral life of an average person demands only a fraction of this discipline. All the discipline is just ordinary compared to what is demanded of one who wants to pierce the depth of the mystery of man. Such a person is required to do nothing less than giving a right about turn to his energies. This process has been called by the verse as avritta chakshu, referring to the inherent outgoing tendency of the sense organs and mind, and the complete overcoming of this tendency by this spiritual pioneer. Shankara says in his commentary on this verse, even though people are of this nature, yet, like the technique of making rivers flow in the opposite direction, the dhira, the one endowed with intelligence and determination, realizes the inner self by becoming avritta chakshu. One who completely turns away all his sense organs like eyes, ears, etc. from all sense objects is avritta chakshu. Thus, becoming purified, he realizes the inner self. It is verily not possible for one and the same person to be absorbed in the thought and sense objects and realize the inner self. For what purpose then does Dhira, restraining thus with enormous effort his natural propensities, realize the inner self? The answer is desirous of immortality, deathlessness, which is one's own eternal nature. The process of avritta chakshu involves the diverting of attention from outside to inside. And the attention cannot be directed inside unless the body, senses and mind are brought to rest, because the activity at the level of body and senses naturally drag the mind outside towards the sense objects and bodily needs. The process of quietening the senses and the facet of mind which is connected with the senses has been called as tapas. Tapas or austerity is usually understood to involve a lot of forceful effort. When we try to accomplish something which is not usual or habitual, the effort is no doubt necessary, but force can be detrimental. It is to be noted that the body and senses should never be quietened forcefully, as it can result in suppression, causing many abnormalities in the practitioner. Moreover, an unfinished transaction at any level, whether body, sense or mind, drags the attention towards it and demands its fulfillment. Samadhanam is the word used by Acharya Shankara when he explains the significance of tapas. Ananda, who was like a shadow to the Buddha, once told the master all the effort he had put for quietening the mind was of no avail, the Buddha did not give any reply immediately. A few days later, they were on a journey and were walking. They crossed a small, shallow stream which had crystal clear water. After covering some distance, they encountered small bullock carts going on the opposite direction. The Buddha said that he was thirsty and wanted water. Making him sit under a tree, Ananda rushed back to the stream. To his dismay, he discovered the stream water was dirty, for the bullock carts had churned the mud from the bottom as they crossed. The disciple returned empty-handed and reported that the water was not at all potable. Strange as it may seem, but Tathagata insisted that Ananda should return to the stream for bringing the water. With much hesitation, he returned to the stream and found, to his pleasant surprise, that the water had retained its crystal purity. Immediately it struck him that Tathagata had given him the message that one never puts effort in quietening the mind, one just allows the mind to quieten. Samadhanam indicates this patience to watch without involvement the body, senses, and mind while being in the midst of even the most turbulent activity. Every effort to clean the muddy water only increases the agitation, or like a person going deeper into the quicksand with any movement. Similarly, the effort should be restricted to only the non-involved witnessing. The Buddha had developed a wonderful technique of such witnessing which he had called vipassana, or a special way of seeing. But Ananda, like most of us, had forgotten to remain non-involved and had been indulging in complaining or worrying about the lack of control that only added to the mire of mental activity. In this sense, the patience to wait and watch without any involvement requires more courage than active involvement. That is how the Upanishad calls such a person as Dhira. Most of us are obsessed by the external, in which dimension we have to act for achieving something. This understanding has rewarded us with the habit of occupying ourselves in perpetual activity. The inner world is entirely different. Unaware of this, we invariably ask the wrong question: how to achieve the patience to wait and watch without involvement? That how contains one of the greatest paradoxes. What activity should one engage in to become inactive? It is like asking how should one move to get out of the quicksand. The more we move, the more we get stuck. So one should stop doing anything and the rest takes care of itself. Most of us understand this intellectually, but find it impossible to be quiet. The golden observation of those who have attained to Jnana or wisdom is that the ultimate reality is unmoving and transcends all activity and cannot possibly be achieved through any activity. A beginner is very much aware intellectually but is helpless practically. The Upanishads state that the misery experienced is due to the ignorance or wrong notion which they call as ajnanam, or the solution, and the solution lies in correcting the wrong notions. The rishis of the Upanishads suggest the best way as becoming aware of the activity and tell the seeker to wake up and see it. They too offer the seeker's method of samyagavekshanam, or inner observations, to achieve the jnana or the awakened state. These seekers, who are not governed by obsessive activity, whose bodies, senses and minds are comparatively calm, are able to adopt the Upanishadic method of such inner observation. Obviously, it is not for everyone, and the Upanishads thus set a stringent eligibility norm. Some rishis, however, who were very much aware of this practical difficulty of beginners, suggested methods and means to slowly overcome the habit of obsessive activity. They suggested that by gradually performing the external activity with awareness, one can calm it down. The rishis stated that the problem of misery is the presence of vritti or unruly force within, and the answer lies in taming or softening those forces to the final position of peace. The process they called as yoga. This point has been beautifully mentioned by Yoga Vasishta. Dvau kramo chittanashaya yogo jnanancha raghava yogas tadvrittirodho hi jnanam samyagavekshanam. O Raghava, there are two methods of eliminating the domination of the mind, yoga and jnana. Yoga is controlling its vrittis or activity. Jnana is samyagavekshanam or the inner observation. Essentially, therefore, both yoga and jnana offer solution to the basic problems of humanity. The different schools of yoga suggest different starting points for controlling the vrittis. Thus, yoga deals with the mind indirectly, as in the guerrilla warfare. The Upanishads, however, expect the seeker to have certain calmness of mind and to have the capacity to change its normal direction as they deal with the mind, intellect, or experience directly. Yoga and the Upanishads help the seeker to overcome the problems of life from different dimensions. In this sense, both yoga and the Upanishads are complementary to each other, leading the seeker to the same goal of transcendence from the limitations of the mind and other facets of human personality. The essays in this book deal only with the methods of the Upanishads for internalizing the mind. The method differs from Upanishad to Upanishad depending on its viewpoint. Each one of us has to discover the path that is most suitable, and maybe that is why there are so many paths and there is so much of confusion over the myriad of paths. However, the effort and the subsequent struggle to discover the path is in itself worthwhile. Sureshwaracharya, one of the most illustrious disciples of Acharya Shankara, writes somewhere, Yaya yaya bhavet punsam vyutpatti pratyagatmani sasaiva prakriya sadvi jneya sa chanavastita. That path alone, by following which a person becomes grounded in the knowing of the real I principle, is the right path for him. There is no single path which suits all alike. He points out that the aim of any path is to know the Pratyagatman or the inner self or the I principle. The confusion arises out of the overindulgence in the path. If one knows the end point of the search, or if one is aware of what is being sought, then all confusion melts. It is good and advantageous to know and to remember that the end point of all seeking is same, and that all activity leads one towards that end point. The present ailment that afflicts humanity at large is that all our activity is unconscious and apparently aimless, and hence there is misery all around. A man spoils his health to acquire material wealth. His relationship with his others suffers due to his pursuance of power and control over others. Our science and technology aim at the conquest of external nature without any effort to have control over the internal nature. Most, if not all of our development is tending towards destruction of the ecology with catastrophic effects on the very survival of humanity. Science, philosophy as well as religion are no doubt different approaches directed towards the search of truth. Science tries to explain the mystery of the universe as observable by the senses and explainable by the intellect. Philosophy, on the other hand, makes exclusive use of intellect to explain the world of matter as well as mind, while religion utilizes only the heart or emotions to feel the presence of the God who controls everything. All these disciplines deal with the universe of experience only from without, and their limitations may possibly proceed from their approach. A seeker, fit to seek through the approach of the Upanishads, has long been in search of truth. He has probed into the mystery of the universe and discovered the universe to be changeful, evanescent. He has subscribed to the current belief in an extra cosmic, omnipotent, and omniscient God behind the universe and has found his belief logically tenable. In the strength of this belief in the infinite behind the finite, in an absolute behind the relative, in an immortal and changeless being behind the world of change and death, he can remain content and easily pass in the society for a philosopher or a man of religion. But the Upanishadic seeker is not content with that and has a questioning mind. He is not satisfied with a logical absolute or with a God of monotheistic religious creed, nor is he satisfied with his conventional life in the world of change and death. He wants to experience the immortal and realize the infinite and the absolute. He is convinced that there is a focus of immortality hidden somewhere in the universe of experience. He has tried through science to locate it in the external world, but has found out that the world in its near and far aspects, in its microscopic as well as macroscopic dimensions, is ridden with finitude, change, and death. He has examined through philosophy the concept of the absolute and found it intellectually satisfying but emotionally cold. He has scrutinized through religion the concept of God and found it emotionally satisfying but intellectually uncertain. Reality, as revealed by each of the disciplines of science, philosophy, and religion, is satisfying in itself, but being compartmental is non negotiable with others. There is another approach which has helped man to break this impasse, which has led him to the heart of the immortal and the infinite, and provided him with a key with which to open the doors of all dimensions of knowledge and experience. The universe of experience certainly must have a within. This turning of the attention within is the approach of the Upanishads.